Hello and good day to Dr. Kavita. The title of our case study is Donna Ogilvy Cold Case. We are from Group 5 and these are our group members.
Police have made an arrest 26 years after a pregnant woman was murdered in a downtown parking lot. Investigators say genetic genealogy led them to the suspect.
Hello, my name is Shariza and I will be presenting the background of the case. The victim was Donna Ogilvy. She was 24 years old, originally from British Columbia. She has been in Toronto for about 5 weeks when the tragedy struck. Donna was a sex worker. At the time of her death, she was also 4 months pregnant. On March 8, 1998, Donna's body was discovered in a parking lot near Maple Leaf Park in the North York area of Toronto. She has been strangled. The suspect was Ronald Gordon Ackerman, 15 years old at time of his arrest and has been living in Gander, Newfoundland and Labrador and working in Alberta's Oldfields. But back in 1998, he was a truck driver based out of Ontario, just miles away from the crime scene. On February 6, 2025, Ronald Ackerman was arrested at Toronto Pearson International Airport as he returned from Edmonton. He was charged with first-degree murder. Now, let's break down to the chronology of the case. On March 8, 1998, Donna Ogilvy was found murdered in Toronto. She has been strangled and her death was ruled a homicide. DNA evidence was discovered at the scene but did not match any profile in the National DNA Database. From 1998 till 2022, the case remained cold for about 2 decades. The DNA was preserved and sits in evidence, waiting for technology to catch up. On 2022, the investigator used genetic genealogy. DNA was linked to Ronald Gordon Ackerman. Toronto police, with the help of US-based lab Outram, begins using genetic genealogy to build a family tree from suspects' DNA. On 6 February 2025, Ronald Ackerman was arrested at Toronto Pearson International Airport and formally charged with first-degree murder.
So now, let's take a closer look on the investigation process of this case. When Donna's body was discovered in a downtown Toronto parking lot on March 8, 1998, the first responders immediately secured the scene. The standard procedure was followed, like photographs were taken, the area was combed for physical evidence, and the coroner was called in to perform an autopsy. And based on the autopsy result, the cause of death was determined to be strangulation. During the examination and evidence collection, investigators recovered a forensic sample containing male DNA. While the exact source of the DNA hasn't been publicly disclosed, it was likely recovered from her body or clothing, and the male DNA was the clue for this case. However, in 1998, forensic DNA technology was limited. The DNA sample they obtained didn't match anyone in the DNA database at that time. So, despite having that key evidence, the investigators hit a dead end. Unfortunately, the case went cold, but the DNA sample was preserved and carefully stored for future testing in the hopes that technology might catch up in the future. And in 2019, Detective Surgeon Stacey Gallon made a video appeal in retirement. So because of his public appeal, police renewed call for public assistance for this During case. The year of 2021, this case was covered in a Toronto police podcast called 24 Shades of Blue. And because of this podcast, it increased the public awareness and engagement of this case. And police continued to encourage any anonymous tip from citizens. And fast forward to 2022, with the rise of forensic genetic genealogy, the Toronto police teamed up with a US-based lab called Outram. They specialize in something called forensic-grade genome sequencing. It is a more advanced method of decoding DNA that can create a more complete profile, even from older or degraded samples. Using this technology, they build a comprehensive DNA profile from the original evidence. Then they run that profile through genealogical database to look for distant relatives. Through family reconstruction and follow-up investigation, they finally landed on one name, Ronald Gordon Ackerman. Finally, on February 6, 2025, more than 27 years after Donna's murder, Ackerman was arrested at Toronto Pearson Airport. He was charged with first-degree murder, thanks entirely to that DNA sample preserved from the original crime scene. This case actually is a textbook example of why preserving evidence and keeping cases alive matter. It also shows how far forensic science has come, from the cold case in 1988 to a game-changing arrest in 2025.
I, Audrey Serene, will be presenting on how forensic DNA, especially the newer techniques, can be used to solve criminal cases like Donna Ogilvy's. First, let's start with the basics. Short tandem repeat, or STRs, are short repeating sequences in our DNA. They work like a genetic fingerprint. Different person has different DNA sequence that are unique to each person. However, STRs only work if the person's DNA is already in the criminal database. If they've never been arrested before, there is nothing to compare or to match the DNA to. While STR is a more traditional technique, another technique is SNPs. SNPs is not new to science. However, it is new to forensic DNA technique. Single nucleotide polymorphism, or SNPs, can go deeper than STR. This SNP look at tiny changes in the DNA which is specific to the one letter in the genetic code. This makes SNP more detailed and useful, especially when the suspect isn't in any database. For example, STR might miss a match, but SNP can link the DNA to their distant relative. This opened a new lead that the investigators couldn't access before. Then, there is the forensic genetic genealogy, or the FGG. This combines the SNPs with a family tree research. This process is simple. First, they collect the DNA. Then, they use a genealogy website to find the relatives. Next, they build a family tree. Then, they narrow down the suspect from the family tree. Once they narrow down the suspect, they can confirm the DNA match. In Donna Ogilvy case, all the DNA method doesn't lead anywhere for years. If only SNP and genealogy had been used earlier, this case might have been solved sooner. Here are the recommendations. First, we need to do faster integration of advanced DNA technology. We must not let DNA sit unused while the cases go cold. Next, we must establish a clear national guideline for forensic genealogy use. Right now, police can use public family tree sites, but there are no solid guidelines on privacy or consent. This is a problem as people upload their DNA to find their relative and not to be put into the investigations. Without proper rules, we risk crossing ethical lines or losing public trust. In the end, DNA is more than just evidence. It is the key to justice, but it has to be used wisely, fairly, and without delay.
Hello, I am Umu Saada binti Abdurrahman, and in this video I will explain about the legal proceeding involved in the cold case of Donna Ogilvy, who was tragically murdered in Toronto in 1998. At first, when the crime occurred, police secured the scene and collected DNA evidence from the victim's body and clothing. However, there was no match in the national DNA databases at the time. This falls under Section 252 of the Criminal Codes, which outlines crime scene duties, and the Canadian Evidence Act, which governs how forensic evidence must be handled. Besides, with no suspects and no DNA matches, the case went cold. Legally, it remained open because Canada has no statute of limitations for murder. This means the case can be reopened at any time if new evidence arises. Apart from that, to revive interest in the case, Toronto Police made public appeals, including a podcast episode and a retirement video. These actions are protected under Section 2 in bracket B of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which ensures freedom of expression and allows authorities to seek public assistance. Next, in a major breakthrough, investigators partnered with Outram Incorporation to apply advanced DNA testing and forensic genetic genealogy, which allowed them to link the crime scene DNA to the suspect's relatives. However, this process falls into a legal gray area as Canada currently lacks clear laws on the use of public genealogy data. It is loosely governed under PIPEDA, which is the federal privacy law. At last, on 6 February 2025, Ronald Gordon Ackerman was arrested at Toronto Pearson Airport. He was formally charged with first-degree murder. The arrest follows Section 231 and 235 of the Criminal Code, which define and penalize murder. His rights at arrest were protected by Section 10 in bracket A and 10 in bracket B of the Charter, which guarantee the right to be informed of the charge and the right to legal counsel. As a conclusion, the Donna Ogilvie case highlights the powerful role of forensic DNA in solving long unsolved crimes. Although the case went cold for over 2 decades, advancement in DNA analysis, especially forensic genetic genealogy, allowed investigators to identify a suspect by tracing genetic links through public databases. This case proves that traditional DNA methods like SDR may be limited without a match, but newer tools like SNP testing and family tree analysis can unlock new leads. It also shows the need for clear legal guidelines to ensure these methods are used responsibly. Ultimately, forensic DNA was the key to reopening the case and bringing it closer to justice. That's all from us. Thank you.